Her eldest son stood on the porch, bouquet in hand, apology rehearsed. Nora didn't speak, just handed him the updated estate file. His name was missing. "You buried my grief to save face," she said, "so I buried entitlement." He looked past her, to the brass plaque gleaming in the garden. The Harold Lang Reading Center, her signature, his legacy, not theirs. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe." His mug sat on the windowsill. "My son told me to move on." The mug was still warm when Nora placed it gently on the windowsill. Steam curled from its rim like breath from memory. She wrapped her hands around it, though she wasn't cold. Outside, the garden was beginning to green. April sunlight kissed the soil, the birdbath, the empty bench. Her husband had loved mornings like this, quiet, filtered through tea leaves and window glass. His chair at the table remained untouched, the cushion still molded faintly to the shape of his absence. The front door opened without a knock. Kyle entered briskly, dropping car keys in the bowl by the door. "Hey, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart." She didn't rise. He walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, then shut it again without taking anything. "You need more in here." "It's just tea and yogurt." Nora looked at him over the rim of the mug. "That's enough for me." Kyle leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "Look, I wanted to stop by and check in. I know this is still hard, but it's been a year and a half and we're worried." Nora blinked slowly. "We? Kara and Jamie, too. We all think maybe it's time to move forward." "Forward," she echoed. He gestured toward the dining room. "The place looks exactly the same. His chair, the robe still hanging in the hallway, the pictures. You've got to stop living in a shrine." Nora's grip on the mug tightened. The rim bit gently into her knuckle. "This is my home, Kyle. I live here. I'm not saying throw everything away, just maybe stop drinking out of Dad's cup like he's coming back to finish it." The silence that followed felt like wet cotton, thick, muffling, and too heavy for the moment. He sighed and softened his tone. "We just think it might help if you packed a few things. Maybe donate some books. Switch the photo wall. Grief's not supposed to be permanent, Mom." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Your father and I were married for 42 years. You don't file that into a donation box." Kyle checked his watch. "Okay. Well, I'll call later in the week, all right?" Nora nodded. "Drive safe." When the door closed, the silence returned. Not like cotton this time, but like clarity. She rinsed the mug and dried it with the towel he'd once used for Sunday dishes. The fabric was soft with wear. Her movements were precise, ritualistic. She walked to the hallway where the robe still hung. She left it. She didn't need to prove a point by removing it. Later that evening, she sat by the lamp near the bookshelf and read for nearly an hour before closing the novel mid-sentence. The words had begun to blur. She rose, moved to the hallway closet, and knelt beside the lowest drawer. Behind spare linens and an unopened box of light bulbs, her fingers brushed a familiar spine. Leather, worn, firm. She pulled it out. The estate binder, thick, tidy, untouched since the funeral. Nora carried it to her desk and laid it down like a sacred object. Dust sparkled in the lamplight as she opened the first page. Kyle's name stared back at her under power of attorney secondary. Jamie's and Kara's beneath beneficiaries, equal split. Her name, executor, primary. Next to it, a small sticky note in her husband's handwriting, faded at the edges. "Whatever you decide, I trust you." Her breath caught. She turned to the tab marked discretionary funds, then joint assets, then charitable provisions, blank. The silence grew heavier, but not burdensome. It felt full, like a decision waiting in the wings. She closed the binder softly, then stood and walked to the bookshelf. From behind a row of cookbooks, she retrieved a slim manila folder. On the label, H. Legacy, Draft. She smiled. Nora returned to her desk, sat down, and opened the folder with slow, deliberate hands. Then she picked up a pen, her husband's old one, still resting in the drawer where she'd left it, and clicked it. They treated morning like bad weather. I was just supposed to wait it out. The smell of lemon furniture polish hung faintly in the air. Sunlight streaked through the blinds in pale slats across the hardwood floor. The living room looked exactly as it had the day Nora's husband passed, except for the silence. It had grown deeper, less comforting, more observed. Kara, Nora's daughter-in-law, stood by the fireplace mantel, tapping through something on her phone. She barely looked up when she spoke. "You should really think about boxing this stuff up. The house feels heavy." Nora folded a throw blanket and placed it on the edge of the sofa. "It feels lived in." Kara moved to the mantel and tapped a finger against the frame holding a wedding photo, Nora and Harold on the front steps of their first house, both laughing mid-movement. His tie was crooked. Her veil had a snag. "This picture's been here how long?" Kara said with a casual scoff. "He wouldn't want you stuck like this." Nora turned, very slowly. "Stuck? You know what I mean." Kara shrugged. "Like, grieving forever. I mean, it's been, what? 18 months? You could at least try to look forward." Nora's eyes landed on Kara's manicured hand, still resting on the frame. Gently, but with unmistakable intent, she walked over and lifted it off the mantel herself. "I do look forward," she said quietly. "That's why I remember." She didn't wait for a response. Instead, she walked to the bookshelf and opened the glass cabinet where she stored older photographs and keepsakes. She placed the wedding picture there, away from judgment but still in reach. Kara stood behind her. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying, it's not healthy to live in the past." Nora shut the glass door gently. "You're not trying very hard." The silence that followed was brittle. Kara muttered something about traffic and started toward the door. "Tell Kyle I said we should all talk. Maybe help you declutter or whatever you need. I'll let him know." The front door closed, but the tension stayed behind, sitting in the room like fog that didn't want to lift. Nora moved back to the fireplace. Her eyes flicked to where the frame used to sit, an empty patch of dustless space, the kind that made absences visible. She returned to the cabinet and opened it again. This time, she reached behind the front row of photo albums and pulled out a thin, black folder, the kind used for taxes, for business, for keeping score. Across the front, her late husband's handwriting in silver ink, joint assets, review copy. She hadn't touched it since he passed. The estate attorney had told her everything was in order, that there was no urgency. But today, urgency had arrived in the form of condescension. She sat at the dining table and opened the folder. Inside, spreadsheets, bank statements, notes in the margins with Harold's looping script. One post-it caught her eye. "Don't forget, be specific, otherwise, they'll assume." She let out the smallest breath of a laugh. He'd always known how to translate her silence. She flipped to a page titled Undistributed Holdings, and something new caught her attention. An account she didn't remember. Not in the main summary. Tucked beneath the primary accounts marked with a small asterisk and the initials HW only. Her fingers traced the print. Remaining total, $412,050. Designation, unassigned. Transfer pending. Why hadn't anyone mentioned this? She turned to the very back of the folder, where a paperclip held a short memo labeled, "To discuss next quarter." She stared at it, then reached for a yellow notepad from the drawer and began writing. Unassigned funds, undisclosed designation, family expectations versus written intent. She looked out the window. The garden shimmered faintly under the late-day sun. Then she placed the picture of her and Harold face down on the table, just for now, and turned the page. "They told me to talk to someone, then mocked me when I did." The chairs were set in a circle, all facing each other but none too close. Soft, instrumental music played from a speaker in the corner, the kind that hovered in the air like polite conversation. A woman named Ruth offered tea from a thermos labeled Community Matters, and Nora accepted it gratefully, even though it was lukewarm. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust, like a church basement that had tried to evolve into something more modern but hadn't fully let go of its past. Nora sat down, third from the left. Her palms rested in her lap, fingers woven tightly together. She wasn't nervous. She was measured. Around her, strangers spoke in gentle tones about anniversaries and headaches, about sleeping too much or not enough. One woman said she missed the sound of shoes at the door. A man said he still poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit. No one laughed and no one cried loudly either. Grief in this room was not theatrical. It breathed, low and steady, like a second heartbeat. When it was Nora's turn, she spoke only 3 sentences. My husband used to keep sugar cubes in a drawer beside the bed, for no reason, just to feel indulgent before sleep. She smiled faintly. I found a half-used box the other day, still sweet. Ruth nodded. Thank you, Nora. No one interrupted. No one offered unsolicited advice. That night, Nora returned home with the printed receipt still in her purse. 1 session, $15, paid in cash. Margaret L. Community Center, Tuesday, 6 p.m. She tucked it into her desk drawer beside Harold's obituary, 2 pieces of paper that proved something had happened. The next morning, she made herself tea and opened her phone. There was a message in the family group chat titled Mom Check-ins. It was mostly updates about groceries, lawn maintenance, and the occasional emoji-filled "You okay, Ma?" She scrolled absent-mindedly until her thumb froze over a photo. It was a screenshot from Kara, the counseling receipt. The exact one Nora had tucked away. Her son must have seen it when helping her with printer issues the week prior. Above the image, Kara had added, "She's going to grief group now, like, does it ever end?" Below it, a thumbs up from Jamie. Then Kyle, "Guess not. Just let her vent somewhere else for a change, lol." There was a silence in Nora's chest that didn't feel like heartbreak. It felt like concrete setting. Slow, solid, unshakable. She didn't respond. She didn't call. She didn't cry. Instead, she clicked the message. Held it down. Selected delete thread. Then she walked into the hallway and stood in front of the large hallway mirror, the one Harold used to glance into and smooth his tie before church. She looked herself directly in the eyes and made a vow, not with words, with breath. From now on, she would no longer invite people into her grief who only came to measure it. Later that evening, she sat at the dining table with her notepad. A few names from the support group lingered in her mind. Thoughtful ones. Specific ones. People who didn't flinch at words like still or again. She began writing a list titled Trusts, Emotional and Otherwise, Harold, Me, Maybe Ruth, Definitely Not Kyle, Not Kara, Not Jamie, Not anyone who confuses silence for surrender. She paused, then underlined the final line twice. Outside, dusk pressed against the windows. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt owned, occupied by intention. She stood, walked to her desk, and opened the drawer again. The counseling receipt lay there. Nora pulled it out. With a small clip, she pinned it to the corkboard above her desk. Then she reached back into the drawer and pulled out a second envelope, labeled in Harold's handwriting, for revisions. They thought I was broken. I was taking inventory. The attic door groaned like it hadn't been opened in years, because it hadn't. Nora climbed the wooden steps slowly, one hand clutching the railing, the other holding a yellow legal pad. The dust met her like a memory, familiar and weightless, and settled in her nose with a faint tickle. She wasn't looking for keepsakes. She was tallying absences. The air was cooler up here, thin with disuse. The trunks and boxes bore Harold's handwriting in fading black marker. Thanksgiving, glassware, books, office, Nora's scarves, don't donate. That last note made her smile in spite of herself. She crouched near a stack of labeled bins and flipped open the first one. Inside, layers of crumpled packing paper. No scarves, just hollow space. She added a line to her list, Box 4, Scarves Missing. Likely Kara. Next, the cedar chest. She unlatched it and peeled back the blanket folds, but the china set she and Harold had received on their wedding day, delicate blue and white porcelain, never used except at anniversaries, wasn't there. Another line, Wedding china, 12-piece, Kara, said she'd store it. Downstairs, she moved from room to room with the pad in one hand and a quiet mind sharpening by the minute. In the den, a space on the wall where the small oil painting Harold had bought in Rome used to hang, gone. Rome painting, taken 2022, Kyle, just for the new office. In the garage, the shelves where the antique lantern used to sit were bare. She blinked slowly and wrote, "Lantern? From Dad? Jamie, never returned." It wasn't the objects themselves. It was the assumption that they were owed, that grief was a door left open, and that they had walked through without knocking, without asking if she was okay, if she wanted to let go. Nora returned to the living room, the pad now filled with 23 items, 8 of which she could account for, all borrowed, none returned. She sat on the couch, breathed in deep, and reached for the drawer beside her. It slid open with ease. Inside, her laptop. The screensaver still paused on a photo of Harold wearing a Christmas sweater, mid-laugh. She opened her email. There it was. An old thread from a year ago with estate planning inquiry, M. Torres Law in the subject line. She had never replied. Not when the grief was too loud, not when silence had settled, but now the silence was informative. Her fingers hovered, then typed, "I'd like to revisit our previous conversation. I believe I'm ready." She hit send before doubt could argue. Then she stood again and walked toward the hallway closet. Folded in tissue at the back of the shelf was an envelope addressed to her in Harold's handwriting. She'd found it 3 weeks after the funeral and hadn't opened it. Until now. She slid her finger along the flap and unfolded the single page inside. "Dear Nora, if you're reading this, you're still holding everyone together. You always did. But don't forget, you're allowed to hold yourself together too. You don't need permission. Not even mine. H." She read it twice, then pressed it flat inside her estate binder. The laptop pinged behind her. She walked back to the couch. The screen glowed with a reply. "Of course, Mrs. Lang. Ready when you are." It held our memories, and their motives. It was almost midnight when Nora pulled the last of the winter sheets from the closet, folded them neatly, and placed them in a linen basket beside the bed. She wasn't preparing for guests. She wasn't redecorating. She just needed something to do, something with order, with corners, with lines that could be folded and smoothed and understood. As she leaned down to straighten the bedskirt, her hand bumped against something hard beneath the frame. It made a muted thud, not sharp enough to alarm, but enough to pull her focus. She crouched and lifted the edge of the coverlet, squinting into the dark gap beneath the bed. Her fingers grazed the smooth plastic of a long, shallow storage bin, the kind she hadn't touched in years. She pulled it toward her, slow and steady, the wheels creaking faintly against the floorboards. The sound echoed more loudly in the quiet house than she expected. The lid came off with a soft snap. Inside, she found layers of old sweaters, some his, some hers, each folded with care and smelling faintly of cedar and thyme. Beneath them were envelopes of photographs, worn books with yellowed pages, and at the very bottom, 2 thick folders she didn't immediately recognize. One was blue, the other red. The blue folder was labeled in Harold's handwriting, "Personal H.W." Nora sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it. The first few pages were scribbled notes in Harold's dense block script, meeting agendas, to-do lists, some typed drafts of letters he must have written and never sent. But deeper in, she found something she hadn't expected, something she was sure he'd never mentioned. A document titled, "Lang Family Giving Fund, Initial Draft Proposal." The date at the top was nearly 6 months before his diagnosis. It was thorough, carefully organized, and annotated in Harold's own hand. His goals were clear. He had wanted to set up a foundation, not for the family, but for the community. Specifically, for adult literacy and neighborhood learning centers. Nora's breath slowed as she read each section. "Access to language is access to dignity," he had written in the margin of one page. "Let this be the part of us that continues." His outline included a breakdown of potential board members, retired educators, librarians, former students. And then, next to one name, hers, he'd written, "Nora, decision maker. She'll know where the meaning is." He had done all of this quietly, thoughtfully, and without ever telling her. Not because he didn't trust her, she realized, but because he was waiting to be sure. He hadn't lived long enough to finish it, but now, somehow, it had found its way back to her. She reached for the red folder next. This one was heavier. Inside was a spreadsheet labeled, Itemized gifts and loans to children. The columns were neatly typed, the categories precise. Kyle, down payment assistance, $48,000. Kara, business startup gift, $12,000. Jamie, car loan plus tuition balance, $31,400. Miscellaneous cash gifts, holidays, rent, credit card help, $19,600. No judgment, no bitterness. Just records, totals, a silent accounting of the generosity they had extended, and the silence that had followed in return. On the final page, written in Harold's own unmistakable hand, was a single sentence: "They'll expect what they've always taken. Make sure what matters goes where it can grow." Nora closed the folder slowly, her fingertips lingering on the edge as though to absorb the words through her skin. The air in the room had shifted. Not colder, not warmer, but denser somehow. He had trusted her with something. Not just the house, the documents, or the money, but the purpose behind it. She stood up carefully, took both folders to her desk, and sat down beneath the soft amber glow of her reading lamp. Outside, a breeze stirred through the early spring branches, brushing against the windows like quiet insistence. She opened her laptop, created a new document, and typed the title, Lang Foundation, Mission Statement, Draft. Then she began to write, slowly, intentionally, and by the time she finished the first paragraph, the cursor blinking steadily beneath her name, the shape of Harold's vision had started to become her own. They boxed up his books. I unpacked my next steps. The boxes appeared before Nora had even noticed them being unfolded. Brown cardboard, neatly stacked by the front door like a quiet invasion. Kyle had brought them in without a word, while Kara wandered room to room with a roll of masking tape and the determination of someone on a timely. "We thought we'd help you get a jump on things," Kara said cheerfully, pulling open the glass doors of the living room bookshelf. "You know, lighten the load." Nora looked up from her chair, a folded newspaper in her lap, and her glasses perched low on her nose. "Lighten it for whom?" "For you," Kyle chimed in from the hallway. "Come on, Mom. These shelves haven't changed in years. It's time." Nora said nothing. She adjusted her glasses and watched as Kara removed the first of Harold's books, Leaves of Grass, a signed edition with brittle pages and Harold's penciled notes in the margins. It went straight into a box marked Donate without hesitation. "Careful with that," Nora said, her voice calm but precise. "That one's older than either of you." Kara paused and offered a quick, non-committal smile. "It's okay. We'll set aside anything that looks sentimental." They moved quickly, treating the house like an overstuffed attic they'd been given permission to empty. Shelves were cleared of hardcovers and photographs. Harold's favorite cufflinks, kept in a dish by the lamp, were brushed into a smaller box without a glance. A framed certificate from his years on the school board was leaned against the wall like a thrift store find waiting to be priced. "Clutter," Kara murmured. "So much of it." Nora rose from her seat and walked past them without a sound. She went into her study and closed the door behind her. There, she opened the second drawer of the filing cabinet where she had begun storing the documents from Harold's foundation proposal. The folder she had labeled Lang Foundation. Vision Draft was still at the top, undisturbed. Beneath it, she began slipping in other items, the bank records, the inventory list she'd started in the attic, and the handwritten notes from Harold's proposal. She moved slowly, but with conviction, each action like a sentence she didn't need to say aloud. The sound of tape tearing echoed from the hallway. She didn't flinch. When she opened the top drawer for a pen, something slipped down the side and caught her attention. Tucked between two old envelopes was a tri-fold pamphlet, crisp and clean, as if it had waited for this moment. She pulled it out and unfolded it. Across the front, in a clean serif font, it read, "Notary Services, Home Visits Available." She stared at it for a long moment, then set it beside the foundation folder. Back in the living room, the shelves were bare. Kyle stood holding a small bronze statue of Harold's, a lighthouse figurine Nora had given him for their 30th anniversary. "You mind if I keep this one?" he asked, already halfway to his coat. Nora looked at the empty space on the shelf. "It was a gift between us." "That's different." Kyle hesitated, then shrugged. Sure, thought I'd ask. They didn't linger much longer after that. Kara glanced around at the tidy room with a kind of satisfied nod, then bent to lift a final taped box. Just call if you need anything, she said on her way out. I will, Nora replied, though she didn't intend to. The door closed behind them with a soft click. The house was still again, but the space they left behind wasn't emptier. It felt freshly defined. Nora walked back to her desk. She picked up the Notary pamphlet, ran her thumb along the edge, and placed it on top of the folder labeled Final Draft, in progress. Then she opened a blank sheet of paper and wrote the title in bold letters, Power of Decision, Nora Lang. They assumed everything was still theirs. I assumed nothing. The receptionist smiled with the soft efficiency of someone used to handling fragile topics. Ms. Lang? He'll see you now. Nora stood, smoothing the front of her navy coat with deliberate grace, and followed her into a quiet office lined with books and muted sunlight. The smell of polished wood and lemon oil filled the air, clean, controlled, like the choices she was about to make. The attorney rose from his chair. Mrs. Lang, it's good to see you again. Thank you for making the time, she said, settling into the chair across from him. She unzipped her leather folder and removed a manila envelope. I've made some decisions since we last spoke. He didn't rush her, just nodded and reached for a pen. I'd like to update the beneficiaries, Nora said, her tone calm but precise. Effective immediately. The lawyer leaned forward. Do you have the new list? She unfolded a handwritten page, 3 columns, neatly printed in blue ink. Under removed, she had listed 2 names, Kyle Lang and Kara Lang. Under retained, 1, Jamie Lang. Under added, she had written 5 names, Dr. Susan Hale, retired librarian mentor, Thomas Evers, Harold's former student, now a literacy coach, Elmwood Adult Literacy Center, Lang Foundation, Managed Trust, Nora Lang, sole executor. The attorney read it carefully, then looked up. You're sure? They've made assumptions I no longer feel obligated to honor, she said without pause. Assumptions about my grief, my home, and my resources. He nodded. You don't need to explain, but I'm glad you did. There was no anger in her voice, only clarity. She wasn't punishing anyone. She was correcting the record. I'd also like to formalize the foundation. The mission statement is drafted. The documents are ready. I'd like the trust to begin disbursement to the Elmwood Center within 60 days. Understood, he said, already scribbling notes. That would legally require a shift in your living trust structure, but we can handle that here. Do you have an alternate executor in mind if— I'll be naming Thomas as successor, she interrupted gently. He understands what this is meant to do. The lawyer looked pleased. It's rare to see something so thought through. Nora allowed herself a small smile. Harold started it. I'm just making sure it doesn't stop. They spent the next hour reviewing documentation, titles, allocations, medical directives. The deeper they went, the lighter she felt. By the time they reached the final signature page, the weight she'd been carrying for the last 18 months had shifted, not gone, but no longer dragging. As she signed, her hand was steady, no tremble, no hesitation. After the last page was complete, the attorney stacked the papers neatly, clipped them together, and reached for an embossed folder. He tapped his pen against it lightly. Do you want this witnessed or sealed? Nora looked up, surprised by the formality of the question. She imagined Kyle sitting in the sunroom and casually asking, Did you ever finish that paperwork, Mom? She imagined Kara's polite half-smile, the one she wore when she wanted to pretend things were still under her influence. And she imagined Harold, his fingers brushing hers across the kitchen table, saying, Whatever you decide, it'll be the right thing. She exhaled slowly. Witnessed, she said, her voice firm. I want it real before anyone assumes otherwise. The lawyer nodded and slid the folder across the desk. As Nora reached for it, a breeze stirred the curtain behind her. The window cracked just slightly. The faintest sound of children playing in the park across the street floated in, sharp and clear through the glass. She paused, then placed her initials on the bottom of the page. The lawyer looked up and smiled. You just rewrote everything they thought they owned. They asked what I did this week. I said, "Housekeeping." Nora was in the kitchen folding a tea towel when she heard the knock. Light, habitual, and unnecessary. Her children rarely waited for invitations. Kyle and Kara entered like they always did, shedding the wind from their jackets and their curiosity into the room in equal measure. Kara scanned the living room with brisk detachment, as though measuring its square footage for resale. "We were in the neighborhood," Kyle said casually, offering her a half-smile. "Thought we'd check in." "I see," Nora said, adjusting the tea towel with unnecessary precision before laying it across the oven handle. "How neighborly of you." Kara wandered into the hallway, not waiting to be offered a seat or a cup of tea. Kyle followed, pointing toward the bookshelf now carefully reorganized with fewer photos and more space. "It looks tidier in here," he said, trying to sound neutral. "I've been keeping busy," Nora replied, her tone mild. "You know, a little spring cleaning." Kara reappeared with an envelope in hand. "Is this the will?" Nora didn't raise her voice, didn't even blink. "That?" "Oh no, that's an old copy. I keep it for nostalgia's sake." Kara looked confused for a moment, then glanced at Kyle, who gave a small shrug. "You've been doing a lot of housekeeping then," she said a bit too sharply. "I told you I had," Nora answered, "just not the kind you're used to." The air in the room stretched, taut with the weight of things unsaid. Nora walked over to the mantel and adjusted a framed photo, one of Harold in his reading chair, a book in one hand and his glasses sliding down his nose. She held it for a moment longer than necessary before setting it back in place. "You know," she added, turning to face them, "there are many kinds of legacies. Some fit in folders, others sit in silence until you've earned the right to open them." Kyle tried to keep his voice light. "We just want to make sure everything's settled, Mom." "I'm sure you do." Neither of them noticed the small safe tucked beneath the armchair or the envelope marked "Certified Copy." "Do not duplicate" sitting inside. What they did see was exactly what Nora had planned for them to see, a decoy will folded neatly and placed where curious hands could find it. They stayed for another 20 minutes, asking perfunctory questions about groceries, about her health, about whether she'd been sleeping through the night. Nora answered all of them with a quiet smile, her tone never rising, never faltering. After they left, she locked the door, turning the bolt slowly. The silence that reigned felt less like absence and more like alignment. She walked back into her study and opened her desk drawer, not the shallow one, but the second one down, where she had slipped the real documents, notarized and sealed. Atop them sat a single business card, Elaine Matheson, mobile notary, discreet home appointments, and below it, an appointment slip. Thursday, 9 a.m. Nora tapped the corner of the card against the desk for a few seconds, then picked up her phone. Her fingers moved calmly across the screen. When the voice on the other end answered, she didn't hesitate. "This is Nora Lang," she said. "Just confirming for tomorrow. Yes, everything will be ready." She ended the call and returned the card to its place, smoothing the top sheet with her palm. Then she closed the drawer, firmly, purposefully, locking it with the tiniest, almost inaudible click. "They said I cry too much. I cried when I signed the last page." The doorbell rang at 8:57 a.m., 3 minutes early. Nora had already been sitting at the dining table, dressed in soft gray slacks and a cardigan Harold once teased her for never throwing out. The coffee in her cup had gone cold, but she hadn't noticed. She stood, smoothed the fabric at her waist, and opened the door. The woman on the other side wore no perfume, no clattering jewelry. Her heels made no sound on the porch. She was in her early 40s, perhaps, professional but kind around the eyes. She held a slim leather briefcase and extended a hand with quiet confidence. "Elaine Matheson, mobile notary." "Nora Lang," she replied, taking her hand. "Thank you for coming." They sat at the table where everything Nora had prepared sat neatly arranged in the center. The estate documents, the revised will, the trust disbursement letters, and the Lang Foundation's final registration packet, clipped together with a gold fastener. "I've already reviewed everything twice," Nora said, her voice steady but quiet. "I just need to make it official." Elaine nodded, pulled out her journal, and uncapped her pen. Take your time. I'm here as long as you need. The room was filled with morning light, soft and pale through the kitchen window, casting long stripes across the floorboards. The tick of the wall clock was the only sound as Nora picked up the pen. She glanced once at the final page, her own name, written in type, waiting for her signature. Her hand hovered above it. "I always thought we'd do this together," she said aloud, more to the silence than to the notary. "Harold and me, we used to joke about who would outlive who, and I always said I'd rather go first because I'd never know what to do without him." Elaine stayed still, offering the space without interruption. "But he left me a map," Nora continued. "He just didn't tell me it was buried in the house." Her hand moved slowly. The pen touched paper. Her handwriting wasn't what it used to be, just slightly shakier now, but it was still hers. She signed the first document, then the second. Elaine guided her through each step with professional precision. "Initial here, sign there, date on the bottom." As Nora moved to the final sheet, the certification of the Lang Foundation as an irrevocable beneficiary of the Lang estate, her hand paused. She glanced down. The lines of ink were clear. Her name, Harold's, a statement of intent, legacy, and permanence. She signed, slowly, carefully. A single tear broke loose at the corner of her eye and fell before she could stop it, landing just beside her signature. It didn't smudge the ink, but it marked the moment. Elaine didn't comment. She simply reached into her case, removed an embossing seal, and pressed it into the bottom corner of the last page. There was a quiet click, then the faint sound of crimped paper. She stacked the documents neatly and slid them into a labeled folder. "Congratulations," she said gently. "It's all yours now." Nora didn't answer right away. She simply stared at the folder, her fingertips grazing its edge. There was no music, no applause, just the sound of her breathing and the faint rustle of wind outside the window. After a pause, she looked up and smiled, not brightly, but deeply, like someone who had finally stepped into the shape they'd been circling for too long. "Thank you," she said, "for being here." Elaine nodded. "It was an honor." As the notary gathered her things and left, the house grew still again. Nora sat at the table, folder in front of her, hands resting flat against the wood. Outside, a bird chirped from a tree whose branches she could see just past the curtain. The same tree Harold used to trim, always muttering about how it leaned too far. She closed the folder and stood. From the hallway, the faint vibration of her phone began. A text from Kyle. "Heard you've been busy. Can we talk?" They posted selfies. I lit his candle alone. Nora began her morning like she always had on March 17th, for 42 years now. She rose early, without an alarm, and stepped into Harold's sweater before she made her way to the kitchen. It still held the faintest trace of his cologne, cypress and linen, woven into the fibers like time didn't know how to let go either. The oven was preheating by 7:20 a.m. She didn't need the recipe anymore. Harold had loved cherry pie, not store-bought, not oversweetened. He liked the filling just tart enough to make you think. "Keeps the tongue honest," he used to say, grinning behind a cup of coffee. As she pitted the cherries, she glanced at her phone. No missed calls, no messages. By the time the crust was fluted and browning in the oven, her screen lit up, but not for her. Kara had posted a photo from a brunch downtown, glasses of champagne, smiling faces. The caption read, "Best weekend vibes, as grateful." Nora stared at it for a moment, then set the phone down, face first, and returned to the stove. By noon, the pie sat cooling on the counter, its scent winding through the house, warm, clean, and precise. She set 2 plates on the dining table. One remained empty. The framed photo of Harold she had tucked away weeks ago was now back on the table beside the vase. He looked at her from behind round spectacles, mid-laugh, caught candid in a moment where life had felt as whole as it ever would. She poured coffee into the good china, cut a slice, set it in front of him, and then she ate. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of old wood and the scrape of her fork. She didn't cry. Not today. Today was not for grief. It was for remembering. And for action. After she cleared the dishes, she returned to the desk in the study. The trust document sat waiting inside a locked drawer, already notarized, already executed. But this part, this one piece, was hers alone to send. She opened the laptop and typed slowly, deliberately into the Elmwood Adult Literacy Center's donation portal. The screen blinked with confirmation fields. Donor name, Nora Lang. Amount, $25,000. Dedicate in honor of Harold Lang, educator and believer in second chances recurring gift. Yes. Annual on March 17th. She read the words twice before pressing submit. The screen changed. Thank you for building literacy where it's needed most. A soft ping followed, the email receipt in her inbox. She clicked it open and printed it. The printer warmed, whirred, then hummed to life, the page sliding out crisp and smelling faintly of ink. She folded the paper and slipped it into an envelope labeled March 17th, first gift. Nora stood slowly, took one last glance at the dining table, and blew out the candle beside Harold's plate. The wick curled into smoke, and the scent of burnt wax joined the fading aroma of cherry pie. She opened the window slightly. A breeze lifted the edge of the tablecloth. She could hear the distant noise of children playing blocks away, and somewhere closer, a car horn. Life was continuing, but hers had shifted. Later that evening, as the sun dropped below the rooftops, her phone buzzed on the windowsill. A text from Jamie, the one child who hadn't asked for anything lately. I know what today is. I didn't forget. Did you do something for Dad? Nora looked at the message. Then, without replying, she turned off the phone and walked into the other room to find the certificate of her second donation. They asked if I'd started grieving. I said I'd started editing. The cafe was chosen by Kyle. Trendy. Open concept. Polished concrete floors. Tables wide enough for laptops, not stories. Nora arrived 5 minutes early and chose a seat in the corner by the window, where the light was soft but not too exposing. She ordered plain tea, no syrup, no lemon, just quiet warmth in a ceramic mug. When Kyle walked in, he carried the kind of energy that filled rooms uninvited, head tilted toward his phone, jaw tight with the press of unread emails. "Mom," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "You look good." "I look like someone who waited 5 minutes," she replied without sharpness. "Just fact." Kyle offered a tight smile. "Sorry, meeting ran long." Nora stirred her tea once, then let the spoon rest on the saucer without clink or comment. He reached for his coffee and took a sip before launching in. "I wanted to check in. I know things have been weird. Since Dad." She met his gaze. Waited. He leaned forward. "And with everything going on lately, I just figured maybe we could start talking about the future. You know? Your will, the house, your wishes." There it was. He said, "your wishes," as if they were unfinished paperwork, not already signed and sealed in ink, notarized beside the ghost of a memory. Nora sipped her tea, letting the warmth settle between her ribs. "I didn't realize they were up for discussion." Kyle blinked. "I just meant, if you're finally ready to grieve, maybe you're also ready to—" "I have been grieving," she said quietly, placing her cup down. "You just weren't watching." He hesitated, caught in the unfamiliar tone of her voice. "That's not fair." "I san it?" She folded her hands. "Grief isn't a performance, Kyle. It's a renovation, and I've spent the last year editing." He opened his mouth to reply, then closed it again. The hum of the cafe swelled around them, milk steamers hissing, chairs scraping. A child dropped a fork somewhere behind them, and it hit the floor like a cymbal. "I'm not trying to fight," he said finally. I worry. You're alone in that house. You're sorting through everything by yourself. You shouldn't have to." "I haven't been sorting," Nora said. "I've been organizing." Her voice was soft, even, almost kind. Kyle tilted his head. "Organizing what?" "Legacy," she said, pulling her bag from the floor. She reached inside and withdrew a folded pamphlet, cream-colored thick paper, embossed with gold lettering that read, "The Harold Lang Literacy Foundation, honoring every page left unread." Kyle unfolded it, eyes scanning the mission statement, the donation tiers, The board members listed. He looked back up. "What is this?" "My grief," she said, "in a format you can read." He sat back, blinking. "You created a foundation?" "No," she corrected. "We did. Dad and I. He drafted the idea before he passed. I finalized it, quietly. And the money is his," she said, "and mine, directed with purpose." His mouth opened, stunned. "But why didn't you say anything?" "Because saying something wouldn't have changed how you listened," Nora said. There was no bitterness in it, only truth. Kyle set the pamphlet down slowly. "Is this why you've been so distant?" She smiled gently. "I've been precise, not distant." He rubbed the back of his neck, searching for some familiar version of his mother, someone softer, more yielding. But that woman had folded herself into something sharper now. Folded like a letter meant only for those who would actually read it. She pushed the pamphlet closer to him and stood. "If you want to be part of something, Kyle, start by understanding what already exists." Then she turned toward the door, leaving him alone with his coffee, and a name he'd ignored for far too long. His father's, written not in ink, but in legacy. They built futures on my silence. I built legacy from his. The conference room was nothing like Nora had imagined it would be. No grand marble walls, no polished mahogany, just clean white paint, a chipped pot of coffee on a side table, and 4 folding chairs arranged around a laminate table that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. But in the middle of the table, between grant application packets and donor inquiry folders, sat a single brass plaque. It read, "The Harold Lang Foundation for Adult Literacy Established in Love. Endowed in Legacy." Nora ran her fingers over the engraved letters, tracing the curves of his name. The metal was cool beneath her skin. Solid. She turned as the door opened. A young woman stepped in, mid-30s, with soft eyes and a posture too formal for the room. "Mrs. Lang?" she asked gently. Nora rose. "Call me Nora. I'm Renee. Thank you again for considering me." She paused, clearly nervous. "I still don't know why you thought of me." "You were his student," Nora said, offering a smile. "The one who stayed after class, even when he told you not to worry about the extra credit. You once gave him a Christmas card that said, 'Thank you for never making me feel dumb.' He kept that card in his drawer. I found it when I was packing his things." Renee swallowed. Her eyes flickered, glassy. "He changed my life." "I know," Nora said softly, "which is why I want you to help change others." They sat, and for the next hour, Nora walked her through the structure of the foundation. A starting grant, a community program partnership with the city library, and 3 initial board seats, one of which was now hers. "I'll be here to guide the vision," Nora explained, sliding the bylaws across the table. "But it's your voice I want steering it." The sun moved slowly across the floor as they worked. Outside, the sound of traffic passed in waves, a distant, unimportant noise. Inside, Nora felt something settle, a stillness that wasn't emptiness, but the opposite. A full pause. When the paperwork was signed and the final form notarized, Renee tucked her pen behind her ear and asked almost shyly, "Do you think he'd be proud?" Nora didn't answer immediately. She looked toward the window where a tree's shadow swayed against the glass. "He always said pride was a cheap word," she murmured. "But yes, he'd feel honored, especially by the quiet of it." They packed the documents into the archive box, sealing it with a long strip of tape. No confetti, no fanfare, just one life folding into the next, one story echoing into others. Back home that evening, Nora stood at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea. Her phone buzzed once, an email. The subject line read, "Press Inquiry, Legacy Project Inquiry, the Harold Lang Foundation." From Lauren Kessler, Community Features Journal Star. She tapped it open. "Dear Mrs. Lang, we recently heard about the foundation established in your late husband's name. The story behind its mission is already resonating with several in the education community. Would you be open to a brief conversation about your decision to create the foundation? We'd love to spotlight the values behind it." Kindly, Lauren Kessler's senior reporter Nora reread it twice, then a third time. The spotlight wasn't what she had sought, but maybe, just maybe, it was what the work deserved. She set the mug down, clicked reply, and hovered over the keyboard, then slowly typed, yes. But only if we start with his name, not mine. They brought flowers. I brought receipts. The knock came at 4:17 p.m., a time of day Nora had come to reserve for quiet. The sun hung low outside the window, softening the edges of the world with a golden haze. She'd just finished tidying the dining table, placing fresh lilies in the vase by Harold's photo, when the knock came again. Firmer this time, almost uncertain. She knew who it was before she even opened the door. Kyle stood with a bouquet of tulips, pink and still damp at the stems, clutched like an afterthought. Kara lingered behind him, lips pressed into a line too polite to be warm. Jamie, her middle child, the quiet one, wasn't there. Nora opened the door just enough to lean against the frame. Kyle smiled, too wide, too late. "Hi, Mom." She said nothing, not yet. Silence had always been her scalpel. He looked back at Kara. "We saw the article about the foundation. It's beautiful." Kara nodded, folding her arms tightly. "Didn't realize it had gone live already." Nora's eyes flicked down to the tulips. "Those for Harold?" Kyle's face colored. "No, they're for you." "Odd," she said quietly. He liked lilies. A pause stretched like taut string between them. Kara cleared her throat. "We just wanted to stop by. Say we're proud of what you've done. It's really generous." "And unexpected," Kyle added. "We didn't know you'd done all that." Nora's gaze didn't waver. "You didn't ask." Kyle looked like he might argue, then thought better of it. "I also wanted to say," he began, shifting his weight, "I'm sorry." "For what?" He blinked. "For everything. For the way we handled your grief. We thought we were helping, giving you space, encouraging you to move forward. I didn't realize it sounded like judgment." Kara stepped forward, voice gentler now. "You have to admit, though, Mom, it was a surprise, cutting us out of the estate plan like that, rewriting everything without even telling us." Nora tilted her head. "I didn't rewrite everything, I clarified it." Kara's mouth twitched. "Still, I brought receipts," Nora said. She disappeared into the hallway without another word and returned with a narrow folder. Inside, pages printed in crisp black ink, signatures, amendments, donation confirmations, grant awards already in motion. She handed it to Kyle, whose fingers trembled slightly as he opened the folder. The tulips drooped under his arm. "This is..." He skimmed the top page. "Already executed?" "Notarized, certified, published." She turned to Kara. "I sent a courtesy copy to your inbox last week. It bounced. Full storage, I think." Kara flushed. Nora stepped aside but did not fully open the door. Her body remained in the threshold, still, grounded, and immovable. "I wasn't asking for approval," she said. "Or applause. Or permission." Kyle held the file like it might burn him. "You really left us out?" "No," she said. "You stepped out. I just shut the door behind you." Silence again, but this time it had an edge. Kara tried once more. "But we're your family." Nora looked past her, out to the sidewalk where spring leaves curled in soft wind. "So was he. And you all taught me how conditional that title can be." She stepped back, slowly, hand still resting on the door. Kyle looked at her, no longer like a son petitioning for an inheritance, but like someone staring through glass at a home that no longer remembered him. She gave them both a smile. Kind. Unreadable. And without saying a word, she closed the door, firm, but not cruel, and locked it with a click that echoed louder than any goodbye. I signed my piece and mailed the rest. The envelopes lay on the dining table like unspoken truths, 3 cream-colored parcels, each thick with finality. Nora had written the addresses in her own hand, neatly, as she always had on birthday cards and school permission slips. This time, however, there would be no stickers, no warm doodles in the corner, only names, only what was owed. Each envelope contained a copy of the new estate plan, signed and notarized, pages of hard decisions folded between soft paper, weighted not with anger, but with direction. She had rewritten her legacy not in retaliation, but in restoration. She took her time with the notes. Kyle's read, "You asked me once if I was ready to talk about the future. This is it. I hope you build your own instead of expecting to inherit mine." Kara's, "I forgive the silence more than the dismissal. I hope someday you hear the things I didn't say." And Jamie's, her middle child, who hadn't shown up at the door but hadn't thrown stones either. "Thank you for the space, even when it was awkward. That kind of kindness matters more than you think." She folded each letter and slid it inside, careful not to crease the signatures. There was no need for cruelty. The decision had already been made. What she was doing now wasn't punishment, it was administration. The mail truck came at 9:47 a.m. She waited by the window, watching the carrier in his navy blue uniform loop through the cul-de-sac. When he reached her box, she slipped outside and offered the envelopes with a polite nod. "Special delivery?" he asked, smiling. "Long overdue," she said. Back inside, the air felt different, lighter but not empty. She returned to the table where her tea had cooled and lifted her phone from its charging base. One notification blinked on the screen. 3 new messages, family chat. She opened it. "Kyle, we were trying to apologize. You didn't have to slam the door." Kara, "This is low, you weaponized grief." Jamie, "I don't know what to say. I just hope you're okay." Nora read each message twice, then she clicked the 3 dots in the upper right corner. "Leave group chat?" "Yes." "Delete thread?" "Yes." She stared at the now empty screen. No anger, just clarity. The silence that followed wasn't painful. It was clean. She set the phone down and walked to the living room. On the mantel, Harold's photo stood beside a vase of white tulips, fresh this time, and placed with intention. The Foundation's pamphlet sat just behind it, framed in dark wood, its mission statement now etched into something more permanent than passing apologies. Outside, the wind carried the faint rustle of spring, brushing gently against the windows like a knock that didn't demand entry. Nora sat down with her tea, lifted the mug to her lips, and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't echo with what was missing. It rang with what had finally been said. "They told me to stop crying. I cried with ink instead." The hammer struck softly against the brick, measured taps that echoed across the garden like punctuation marks. Nora didn't turn to look. She knew what they were installing. She'd approved the placement herself, down to the inch. Right where the ivy had once overtaken the corner of the garden wall, a new plaque would gleam beneath the sun. Her chair creaked slightly as she leaned back. On her lap lay a thin folder, the final report from the Foundation's first literacy grant, a program that would fund night classes, mentorship pairings, and library partnerships across the county. It had Harold's name at the top in serif font, embossed. She rested her hand on the folder as if anchoring it. Beside her, on a small metal table, sat a photograph in a frame. Harold, mid-laugh, the corner of his eye crinkling in that familiar way she hadn't seen in almost 2 years, but still saw everywhere. The photo was angled toward her, but she tilted it just slightly more, to face the garden, as if letting him watch. A breeze stirred through the lavender. She could smell the earth, damp and loamy from last night's rain. The air held the green of growth, and beneath it, the faint, dry warmth of stone warming under morning sun. Nora brought the cup of tea to her lips. It was the kind Harold used to call muddy water, but it had always been her favorite. Chamomile with a touch of mint. It grounded her. "I signed it all, Harold," she said aloud, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial. "Every word they tried to silence, I signed. Every tear they rushed, I set in ink." The workers stepped away from the wall. One of them, young, polite, wearing the Foundation's logo on his sleeve, approached with a gentle nod. "Ma'am, would you like to see it?" Nora rose slowly, knees clicking with age, and followed him to the far corner of the yard. The plaque was still dusted with brick powder, but the letters shone through. The Harold Lang Reading Garden, in memory of stories shared and still to come. Her throat tightened. Not from grief, not anymore, but from completion. The kind of ache that arrives not with loss, but with arrival. She nodded, murmured her thanks, and the worker stepped away, giving her space. Her fingers brushed over the edge of the plaque, warm from the sun, smoother than she'd expected. The permanence of it pulsed through her fingertips. She'd carried the grief long enough. Now she'd planted it, rooted it into something that would outlast all the edits her children had wanted to make to her mourning. Behind her, the sound of a lawn chair unfolding startled a bird from the hedgerow. It was Jamie. He said nothing, just nodded toward the plaque. "I read about it online," he said quietly. "Didn't want to crowd the ribbon cutting." Nora gave a slow nod. It wasn't meant to be crowded. They sat in silence for a long moment, long enough for the workers to finish and leave, long enough for the wind to carry a few fallen petals across the stones. "I didn't come to ask anything," Jamie added. "Just wanted to say, it's beautiful, what you did." Nora turned toward him. "It wasn't about beauty, it was about truth." He looked down. "Yeah, I see that now." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Later, when she was alone again, she returned to the chair by the photo, placed the folder back on the table, and lifted the pen Harold had once used to mark essays, checks, and anniversary cards. The same pen she'd used to sign the new documents. The ink had held. She took a fresh sheet of paper. This one wasn't legal, or notarized, or intended for mail. It was a letter. To herself. The first line came easily. "You did not grieve too long. You simply loved for a lifetime and responded accordingly. They silenced my grief. I signed it into permanence.